myself. I'm Bob Gress, and I was the original director of the Great Plains Nature Center. When I was hired by the city of Wichita in 1979, I was hired as a naturalist, and I moved into a park department house that sat on Chisholm Creek Park on Oliver Street. And I lived there for about 4 years. In the early 1980s, we had a new park director. And the new park director, I didn't know, but he knew me and apparently had gone to several of the public presentations that I had done and seemed to know way more about me than I realized when I first met him. Anyway, he asked for me to give him a tour of this park that I was living on that was called Chisholm Creek Park. It was still a mostly undeveloped park. They had put a road in off of the Oliver side, and there were ball diamonds where the Great Plains Nature Center currently sits. And he wanted it to just be him and I. And it was simply a dream walk. We were walking along, and I was envisioning trails and agricultural lands that I thought needed to be returned back to native prairie. We were looking at the narrow Chisholm Creek that ran through the park and looking at areas that we thought the woodland ought to be expanded, but we wanted a diversity of habitat. We had a wonderful walk, and as park director he was so open, and I didn't know that he had been a member of a Sierra Club and Audubon Society, and that was his slant. At the end of our walk, he said, "I'm going to send you an aerial photo. I want you to sketch out some trails. I want you to outline your vision." And I did that. And while I was doing that, within the first 2 weeks after our walk, he got park maintenance to remove all of the soccer goals that were already in on the other side of the park, on the Oliver side. And he said it's better for us not to have them than to get people using them and then take them away later. In 1983 or 4, they started appropriating money for the park, and in 1986, we had the grand opening of Chisholm Creek Park with all nature trails in, or at least the old asphalt trails were in. We had a wonderful grand opening. We had dignitary tours up and down the trails. Aquila, the golden eagle, that was one of our main program animals, broke the ribbon for the grand opening. At the same time that we had the grand opening of Chisholm Creek Park, we also had the public unveiling of something that brought all of the educational components that I had been working with and my new staff. The Wichita Wild program was kicked off. And at that time, it included me and Jim Mason and Connie Elpers and Connie Story. And the Kansas Wildlife exhibit soon followed with its redesign and opening. So Chisholm Creek Park began because we had a park director who also thought this was something that Wichita ought to have. We didn't have any park like this prior to Chisholm Creek. With the Chisholm Creek Park trails open, we had lots of programming and stuff going on. Lots of school groups. We were doing lots of school assembly programs. We were in the field. We didn't have a facility, we were in the field. We were dreaming about how could we be more effective? How could we reach a greater audience? And in 1988, Frank Smith, our park director, and me, and Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks Secretary Bob Minen and Assistant Secretary Alan Wentz met actually at Botanica, which was also brand new at that time. And we proposed to them the concept of joining forces in urban nature education programs. Would it be possible for us to work together with the state to reach a greater audience? Could we be more effective, and could they reach part of their goals by working with us on a partnership of some sort? Luckily, the meeting that we had in 1988 took hold, and the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks folks contacted then Governor Mike Hayden, who was a biology grad from Hayes University and had gone through the ranks of politics and was then governor. He was very interested in the outdoors, very interested in the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, and loved the concept. In 1989, he contacted Senator Dole They worked together on a lot of projects, told him about the projects, wanted his involvement. And in 1990, an election year, Bob Dole was looking for visibility. He came to Wichita. We had a public meeting to look at the project, and there were speakers. He spoke, the governor spoke, city mayor spoke, and I spoke. I didn't speak very much with those guys, but the idea took off. It kind of festered around a little bit, and luckily for us, 1990, as an election year, got Senator Dole to work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and get money in their budget to make this facility happen. Now, they really didn't know what to call this place at that time, and so at least on paper, they were calling it the Wichita Environmental Education Center, which I absolutely hated that name. Well, once the federal government gets involved and once governments start working together, there has to be some glue that they can use to keep things focused. And in 1991, it was time to actually put on paper what the federal government was going to do and what the state was going to do and what the city of Wichita was going to do and what their parts would be. That was outlined in a memorandum of agreement that had a 10-year date on it. And at that time, the memorandum of agreement was supposed to be good for 10 years and then get revisited and reviewed and updated and changed and brought up to speed with whatever was going on 10 years later. But at least financially, these groups could look at the memorandum of agreement and see that there was some commitment to the project. That began in '91, and the memorandum of agreement was actually signed by the mayor of Wichita and by the regional chief of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and by the governor of Kansas. Well, in 1993, after memorandum of agreement was all signed, then we had to keep things moving forward. Coming to our rescue was Sherry Featherman, who was Chief of Education and Public Information with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. She came on board and began to work with us to put together this concept, our vision for what this facility was going to be. But now we had the federal government involved, and so the name of the project changed again on paper, and it was called the Wichita National Environmental Center, which I didn't like that one either. So we began working towards this goal. And we had to have some operational structure, but nobody knew exactly what it was. And we were looking around the country trying to find cooperative partnerships and how these cooperative partnerships might work. And after a bunch of sleepless nights and stuff, I got up in the middle of the night, I still remember doing this, and starting to sketch out how I thought it might function. And I put together the idea of a steering committee with a representative from each of the 3 levels of government that would oversee the direction of the Great Plains Nature Center, approve the programs that were to be put together by the Great Plains Nature Center, and somebody would have to select a director of this facility. And I thought it probably ought to belong to a group representing all the agency, and we called that group the steering committee. And in parentheses where I talked about the staff and I mentioned a director of the Great Plains Nature Center, I even put on there, to this day can't quite believe I did that, but I even put on there Bob Gress if approved by the steering committee. And it didn't happen for quite a few years because we still had growth to go. But we also outlined the staff from each of the agencies and what we thought might be an operational method. We didn't give the steering committee a whole lot of work. They had to kind of oversee the operation, but the 2 primary functions, as we saw it at that time, were to select a director and to approve an annual work plan that would bring that group up to speed with what was going to be happening with the work by the staff throughout the year and make sure that everything that we were looking at met the goals and objectives of each of the agencies. So the steering committee actually led to the first of the many work plans that have taken place since then. Construction for the building actually began in 1994. And in 1994, just before we started, we had one more name change, and it was changed to the Great Plains Nature Center. And that absolutely thrilled me and all the staff and everybody that worked on the project. So in 1994, plans began to move forward with construction. Construction took, I guess, 2 years, and we actually moved into the building in early 1996. We expected in '96 that the exhibits would be following us within about 6 months. So we were hoping for a grand opening that wouldn't be too far down the road. It was later in 1996 that we heard that a snowstorm had collapsed the building in Washington that was housing all of the exhibits that were under construction by a company out of California. And all the exhibits were lost. And with it went all the money that we'd put into it. And there were a lot of tears among the staff, and we knew that it was going to delay things for years, and it did. So we went back to fundraising, trying to come up with more money to do the exhibits. We were continuing doing programs. We had school groups coming. The auditorium was functional. Everything was functional here except the gift shop and the exhibit hall. We really didn't want to open the gift shop. We didn't want to tell people that we had had a grand opening and for people to come and not see everything in its entirety. And we were afraid that people would come, they wouldn't like it as well. And so we delayed the grand opening from '96 when we moved in to the year 2000. And so we had 4 years of getting our act together, including forming the Friends of the Great Plains Nature Center in 1998. One of the main reasons we formed the Nature Center in 1998 was because we had to refinance the exhibit hall. We had people lined up to donate money, but they did not want to donate money to the governments, to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the state of Kansas, or the city of Wichita. The Friends of the Great Plains Nature Center was set up to receive this money, to handle the money, and to dedicate the money for use in the exhibits. Friends was eminently important at that time, and by the time the building opened in 2000, we were ready to kick off the gift shop as well. And so the Friends organization was the likely group to operate the gift shop, which came to be known as the Owl's Nest. I don't think that any of us involved with the development of the Great Plains Nature Center had any idea how important the Friends of the Great Plains Nature Center would become to this facility. We knew that we had to have a partner, but we didn't realize how big of a role the Friends would take in growing. If you take a look at the staff that we had at that time, which was 3 City of Wichita employees, 1 state person, and 1 federal person, it's hard to believe that 6 people could operate this whole facility. We needed volunteers, we needed a volunteer coordinator, we needed somebody to handle the money. It just grew 1 position at a time until eventually most of the employees at what we know as the Great Plains Nature Center today, most of them are Friends employees. The Friends carried such a load that the agency folks realized that these were more than just a support group, they were an actual partner. And so they were elevated to partner status on one of the more recent memorandum of agreements, which continue to this day and continue to get updated when needed. Conservation and environmental stewardship, and how important are they to life in Kansas, in Wichita, and in the country. It's interesting that we're doing this interview today because when I was born, the population on Earth was about 2.5 billion people. And today it goes over 8. And it makes you stop and think, what should our environmental awareness and importance be in the future? And that alone, that number alone, should tell you why it's important. We're not on a planet that can be renewed on a whim, and we can't just take off and go somewhere else. We are here. One of the things that we have tried to do from day one, and I remember some of the very early staff meetings I held with our staff, we were talking about what our goals were with the kids that came and with the adults that we were talking to. I remember stressing multiple times that we have to be accurate in what we tell people. We have to tell truthful things. But those truthful things that we tell them isn't really the big picture and isn't really our goal here. I think our goal at the Nature Center initially was not to tell people what to think, but to encourage people to think. And if we are people that will take the facts, take the information, try to apply it to what we have around us today, and look at what we are going to have in the future, we need people to make decisions that are sound decisions. We don't need to tell people what to think, but we are dependent on what people think. And that's the reason the Nature Center is important. And that's the goals of what we're trying to do at the Nature Center, is to keep people aware, keep people engaged, and keep people looking for the future and making sure that it's sound.